Guys, let's wait for 5 more minutes. And like I see many like faces which are attending our XSpace from quite a few time. So again, thank you guys. Also, do invite your friend because we will have discussion around space breaks, then lab on chip, and many more interesting topics.
Yeah, welcome everyone, and we will be starting in a few minutes. Please do stick around and listen so that you may get new questions, your questions may get answered. So do be patient and stick around till the end, and we will bring you up as a speaker to interact with our guest, Dr. Aloke Kumar, who's already here. So we will be bringing him up shortly, and please be patient with us as we set up the space. Thank you. Also, do feel free to share this space on your timeline, help us expand our reach, and maybe invite more of your friends who are interested in such scientific topics, but also futuristic ones. We are all headed out into the cosmos, and there is a lot of science and technology that is making it happen. So, in the lieu of our topic today of space bricks, we are trying to build your knowledge brick by brick. So, stay tuned, and we will start shortly.
Hello, sir. Am I audible to you? We have already sent speaker invite to you, so like please accept it. Otherwise, you won't be able to unmute and speak.
And if you cannot accept the invite, please do rejoin the space or let us know. So, yeah, in the meantime, I request the audience to be patient with us as we get Sir up on the stage.
Yes, sir. We can hear you. Yeah. So let's start. Datta, please give me a quick check whether everything is okay or not on YT. Okay, so I guess everything is good. So let's start. So hello everyone, I'm Parth Pandya, co-founder of Zetagravit, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the 8th edition of XSpace hosted by Team Zetagravit. Today, we are thrilled to have Dr. Aloke Kumar, Associate Professor at IISc Bangalore, join us. Many of you might recognize him for his groundbreaking work on space break, and today he will be sharing his fascinating journey from fluid mechanics to the emerging field of astrobiology. Before we dive in, let me introduce Dr. Kumar a bit more. He holds both a BTech and MTech degree from IIT Kharagpur and completed his PhD at Purdue University. Before IISc, he served as an assistant professor at University of Alberta. His research spans soft matter, complex fluids, bacteria, biofilms, microfluidics, opto-electrofluids, and biophysics. Among his achievements, Dr. Kumar has led sponsored projects with ISRO and was awarded the prestigious Saroj Podar Young Investigator Award at IISc. So let's get ready to explore his inspiring path from mechanical engineering to astrobiology. So, hello sir, how are you?
Hey, thank you everybody for inviting me. So fantastic to be here. Totally. So thanks again.
Yes, sir. Before we start the session, I want to just let you know that before when I was in 10th or 11th grade during the pandemic, I saw you for the first time on the Garib Scientist video, and from there I came to know that you have created this great thing, and I never thought I would be able to host you someday. So, before starting the session, I'm the electronic guy. So, I want to know more about the lab on chip. So, can you tell me what exactly is lab on chip with the context of Manas payload and what is its importance?
Sure. You know, we are entering into a very exciting phase of space now. Obviously, our entire the satellite industry is getting transformed. Satellites are making a lot of impact in human technology. So we have obviously the communication satellites, all those type of satellites that are becoming more and more important. The Earth, what we call the Earth observation type of satellites, and the Earth observation satellites. But along with that, there are some new ideas that are coming up. So before I can explain to you the lab on a chip version, let me just rewind you a little bit. That the standard satellites that have been operational till date have been either, they either served some kind of civilian purpose, for example, some kind of communication, or they serve civilian and defense purposes, for example, Earth observation satellites. And these were some of the main satellites that have been there till now. Obviously, they are important. That market is also growing. But now there is a growing realization that what we may be able to do is to create these factories in space. So now satellites need no longer be just inanimate objects which are just transmitting data from one location to the other. What might actually happen is the satellites, instead of just remaining just one more chain in the link, might transform into factories. One example of this is the fact that we have been able to make a certain type of cable, which we call the Z-band cables, in space. And in microgravity, the Z-band cables grow very well. The crystallization that happens is more defect free. Bigger crystals of these glasses grow. So what happens is the crystals that are grown in microgravity, they are worth their efficiency when you transform them into, let's say, an application, for example, these communication fibers. There you actually end up getting better quality fibers with them. So these cables that have been grown in microgravity, or the Zeblan uh, crystals that have been grown in microgravity, they have a bigger market today. They have quite a big market today. So, and this entire thing was done on the International Space Station. There are some similarly, there are other topics. For example, there is the idea that what you can do is you can 3D print organs in space. One of the problems of 3D printing on Earth is that sometimes for things like organs which are made out of very sensitive and very uh, pressure sensitive tissues, they when they you grow them in three on Earth, as you lay the biological cells layer by layer, the cells at the bottom start to feel the pressure of the cells from the top, and that sort of causes the 3D printing not to be that accurate. So what people are, I mean, this is already ongoing experiments in on the International Space Station in the US, where they are trying to grow organs in space, and that's one of the advantages of microgravity. So what you can now have are entire experiments, entire much more complicated experiments. So we are moving away, or I should say moving away. Where the standard electronic satellites are still there, but to that now we have added another set of satellites which can do this this kind of 3D printing, let's say biological 3D printing or some other inorganic crystal growing in space, and they will become important. So now you want to have an entire lab in space, and that's where the challenge is. And those are very interesting and very these are the cutting edge work at this particular point. And maybe 10 years from now we will see satellites which are essentially factories. So if you wanted to make a factory now, okay, we know that to get you want to probably get more things into space. So it's not just a set of electronic PCBs that you want to get into space, yeah, or some let's say sensors that you want to get into space. You now want to get an entire lab up in the sky. Weight is obviously a consideration. So there, this idea of lab on a chip, where you shrink the lab down to a small size, where a lot of lab type of work, for example, mixing of fluids. Okay, maybe I'll just start from some other example. So when you go for, let's say, blood tests, you give an amount of blood, let's say 200 ml of blood, to somebody who's taking it. Then they package it, send it to a testing service. They test your blood and then they give you back a report, right? This is what happens in this entire process. There's a lot of people involved: somebody who is taking the blood from you, somebody who's packaging it, somebody who's sending it. Then in the lab there will be one person who will be mixing different reagents with the blood, etc. So there's an entire lab activity that is involved. Lab on a chip tries to do the whole thing in an automated platform. So you shrink this lab down, you automate the entire thing, and you do complex analytical chemistry experiments or other experiments in a small space in a fully automated fashion. And that's basically the idea of lab on a chip.
Wow, that's quite fascinating, sir. I recently went and met a company that was doing a similar use case, but in the pharma industry. And I think their name is Cosmos One. And they mentioned about automated labs in space. And what you're saying is quite futuristic, but we're already there. It's fascinating to think in a decade we might actually be having in space manufacturing, beyond ISS. And it's really, it's not even fathomable, but it's something that we are actually creating right now. So it's really great.
Yeah, it's interesting to know that already startups are getting into this domain. This is going to get really hot. Yeah, it is already hot, but I think in the coming years this will become even more exciting. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, sir. So, can you just, give us a little bit more insight into the Manas payload? Like, we got into what the lab on a chip itself was. But let's get a little bit more specific, because I think your work was a little bit more specific to the Manas payload. What
Yeah.
was this payload, and what were kind of your challenges in trying to design such a payload? Because automating everything, space is a place where human intervention is very difficult, so we kind of design and test and do everything here. And once we send it there, it's all automated. So, yeah, I'd love to hear, how your journey of the payload design and how it came about.
Right. So basically, this entire thing started when I came back to India in 2017. I was a professor in Canada before that for 4 years, and I decided to come back to India. A very wise decision, obviously. But so I was an expert in lab on a chip, having worked in that area for almost more than a decade by that time, and. Then I saw that the Indian human space program was taking off. There was a lot of excitement about that. Saw some excitement about that in 2017, not a whole lot, but still got to know about the human space program and the activities around it. And I realized that we will start needing at some point these lab on a chip devices for human activities or biomedical usage or other things. So we decided to start working on it. At that time, there was no such special requirement that we ever saw from anybody about this. So we decided to start small because we kept to ourselves a very small amount of money. We started with, and we said, okay, if you want to make a lab on a chip, let us start with the simplest one. Let us not start with the most complicated one. So, what is the simplest activity that we do? I am also, my lab has a lot of biotechnological work going on. So, we, for example, grow bacteria and fungus in the labs. And to grow these, there is usually somebody who's highly trained. There's somebody who's a master student or PhD student. They are mixing different fluids. They keep the bacteria, let's say, mixed with one fluid. They keep it in an incubator, which there is a shaking platform, and then every now and then they will take some readings and some optical readings of whether that bacteria has grown or not. So we said, okay, can we take this entire thing and can we make it into a small lab on a chip platform? The entire thing should be approximately the size of a shoebox. Uh, Again, this was not a funded project or anything at the beginning, so we didn't really have big constraints. So we started putting our own constraints. We said, okay, let's make it like a shoebox, less than some, let's say, 10 kgs, and automated everything. So the Manas payload, it's actually Manas. So we called it the microbial analysis in space. That's the acronym for Manas. And Manas is obviously Sanskrit for imagination, so it went well. So we decided to grow bacteria in a small lab on a chip platform. So what we had is we had these spores of a certain bacteria. These are also related to the space bricks. So there are certain type of bacteria that lead to calcium carbonate precipitation. So we took those bacteria. They can be made into a powder form. So they can be made into an inactive powder form. So this you can take this bacteria and make it inactive. So we took this inactive bacteria and then we said, okay, can we create a situation where these inactive bacteria, will be sitting in a small well. Then, when the satellite is in orbit, let's say, we'll flush that entire thing with a fluid of the fluid which can help the bacteria grow. As the bacteria is growing, by the way, the fluid has to be taken from some location on the satellite to the chamber where the bacteria is there, and then has to be flushed into another, let's say, the waste chamber. And then once the bacteria has been flushed with this fluid, it will start to grow, and it will remain confined to this small well-like structure. And then as it grows, you have to also incorporate some sensor so that you can observe the growth of the bacteria. So that's what we did, and we created the Manas platform, which basically grows the entire bacteria in a fully automated platform. The big challenge here was to do 100% automation, and that is extremely challenging. Yes, going even 90% automation, going from 90% to the last 100%, that last 5 to 10%, that is extremely challenging, extremely difficult a job. So yeah, so that was quite a big challenge. We have done that now, so we are quite excited about this. Hopefully, we'll fly it soon. I don't want to give out too much because the flight dates have not been exactly fully confirmed, but I'll keep my fingers crossed. We are hoping to fly this payload sometime soon.
Wow. Okay, that's really great news. I'm kind of excited. India is at, doing quite a bit of, research, and in lieu of Gaganyaan coming in, this sounds quite exciting. Trying to research microorganisms in microgravity environments. I always found it fascinating on the ISS, but it was very limiting. So this sounds very, very optimistic for even our human space flight program. And just in case for the audience that has just joined in, I would like to welcome you all to Zetagravit's eighth space, where we have Dr. Aloke Kumar, and we will be discussing his work on microfluidics, the lab on chip, analog habitats, and ultimately his pioneering work on the space bricks. So I welcome you all. Feel free to share this space, invite your friends, and do join in on the conversation at the end of the space, where you will have some time to have your own questions answered. And if you cannot stick around, please do leave your questions in the comments below. Please help us with your inquisitive, imaginative questions, and we will have Dr. Alok Kumar answer them. And you can rewind and listen to this space at a later date so that you have your questions answered. So, sir, yeah, I would like to get back to the topic. And I would like to ask you a little bit more about the technicalities of, you just said, I think you were putting some kind of automation in there. But I was reading your paper and it was talking about, this monitoring of an optical density, and you're kind of doing some level of electron microscopy. And I think the bacteria was kind of a spore type of bacteria, right? Which was trying to be helping with the calcium precipitation. So, how does this essentially work? Like, how does this optical density help you gauge the growth of the bacteria? Or, can you help us a little bit understand the science behind how you're monitoring it and observing it?
Sure. So, see, I mean, uh, how do you know something has gone? Let's say you have you have some syrup at home, and how do you sometimes know that the syrup has gone bad? Is because you start to see a lot of growth, and maybe the syrup started with a clear fluid, and after some time it has become an unclear fluid with a lot of hazy material in it, right? That's how we recognize, let's say, growth of an unwanted bacteria or an unwanted fungus in our solutions or etc. So that's exactly what optical density sort of does. Is as a bacteria grows, what we usually have when initially the bacteria is mixed with the fluid, the amount of bacteria is extremely small, so the fluid is still very clear. It's just like transparent, like normal water is transparent. And then as the bacteria starts dividing and growing, the liquid starts to become more and more and more turbid. So in quantitative terms, is what this turbid means, that if you shine some light through it, when it was clear, the light would pass through maybe close to 100%. But as the solution becomes more and more turbid, lesser and lesser amount of light passes. So what you can have is, you can have, let's say, a small well-like situation where you pass light from one side, and then on the other side you have, let's say, a photodiode or even a camera sensor, just to measure how much light has come through. So if you keep that light constant, then what you can see is, by just measuring the amount of light that you are passing through the fluidic chamber, you can sort of calculate how much is the turbidity of the solution. So the optical density measurements are basically turbidity measurements. The higher the optical density, higher is the turbidity. And we start with a OD of optical density of 0 in the beginning, and then it sort of goes up. And this is usually a standard measure of biological growth in any, especially for the microorganisms. This is a standard measure of growth. So the trick is obviously to have everything together in a small space, uh, have the fluid come in, and then as the time goes, you have to have an automated measurement every 5 minutes in the lab. Usually somebody will manually do this kind of a test. So they manually take a small, maybe 5 microliters of solution, and then measure the turbidity of it every 2 hours. But in a Manas type of platform, you have to do this automated, in an automated sense. But one of the good things is we can just do it. Uh, uh, we can do it as often as we want, which is very difficult in the lab. Now, the scanning electron microscopy image that you refer to, by the way, that publication that you are referring to, that is a bit old now. We have not published another paper with all the details of the new Manas. So our current platform looks very, very different from what we published in 2019. So now the Manas platform has evolved quite a bit on it.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, and it was an old publication, but this is where I was, when I first searched the term space bricks and it came up, I was, quite fascinated to see all these things because, we are very, on Earth, we are quite abundant in terms of what we do in sensing. When you said, syrup going bad, I didn't think of actually turbidity. I was thinking of smell, right? Like our whole senses are quite limited in space, and so I very well understand why in that in situ environment sensing and analysis is done in an entirely different way. And it's quite fascinating to see how you have handled these challenges. And I just wanted to understand, because you said that SEM has changed. So, are there any limitations in the current kind of sensing technologies, or is there some kind of pioneering research happening for this kind of microbial analysis that you're working on that you can let us in on? Just for our audience here, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, see, definitely. So there's a lot of work. I mean, we in India we were one of the first people to start in 2017. Basically, there was Professor Kaushik from mechanical and me, and there were some students who had joined. Now it's an entirely new group of people who are working on it. Shreyansh and Santosh are working on it. Shreyansh happens to be here in the group right now, by the way. So we have come a long way, but internationally also there's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of interesting things going on. In fact, as part of the Artemis program, there is entire lab on a chip system called the Biosentinel. Biosentinel lab on a chip platform that is being developed. And in Biosentinel, what they are doing is they have a yeast, okay, and this yeast, growth of the yeast is in some sense a measure. This particular yeast reacts to gamma radiation, and they are using, and the gamma radiation, as the radiation grows, the growth of the bacteria, growth of the yeast also changes. So in the Biosentinel program from NASA, they are trying to grow so put this yeast in a small platform and put it up in space. And you can look this up in more detail if you wanted to. And this will basically be microfluidic or laboratory payload that will keep going around the earth or other places for a long time. And as the yeast growth changes, that will sort of be a proxy for gamma radiation's DNA damage. And then you can use that to understand DNA damage that is happening. And maybe you will find some locations where there's more DNA damage happening, and you would want your astronauts not to go to that location. So before even the humans can set foot, we have to understand even more. I mean, see, it's not that humans haven't gone to space, but as we think of habitats, and as we think of colonizing other places, we'll have to start being more and more and more careful about which locations there are problems with, because you are now looking at humans going to, let's say, the moon or somewhere else on Mars for much longer periods. So we have to really scope out all the challenges and all the problems our astronauts could face, and that's one of the things this BioSentinel program is doing. There are a lot of other in the last 10 to 15 years. By the way, the lab on a chip is still a very recent or a very nascent area. Only in the last 10-15 years you will find a lot of work that has been happening both let's say at the European Space Agency and NASA in this regard. So there is one other interesting thing that strikes me. Recently, Varda Space in the US, that startup, they released a news press release which said that they were the first to grow some antiviral drug in space, and that there was no detail about how it was grown. Obviously, I guess that is proprietary in some sense, but I'm assuming that there will be some kind of a lab on a chip system on in which this entire antiviral drug is being grown, and then it was brought back. So there are very few details that I could fish out on this, but there's a lot of exciting things going on.
Yeah, yeah, quite fascinating, and definitely, quite a bit of nascent technologies, and we have lots to explore. I definitely find the Biosentinel program quite fascinating. I think we ought to kind of understand the effect of radiation on biology quite well before kind of expanding out into the cosmos. I know there was a lot of kind of lost knowledge, I would say, because the Apollo program kind of ended, and then we have not really ventured beyond, let's say, low Earth orbit. So um, maybe I wanted to ask you, do you see maybe different environments affecting the lab on a chip, and like what are the different constraints for a lab on a chip program, maybe around Earth or Moon or Mars? Do you feel like that maybe has an impact in terms of radiation or gravitational fields? Because I think I don't know how well the gravity affects these kind of fluid dynamics, but I do imagine there is a certain amount of influence there as well.
That's a great question. What happens is in lab on a chip, you deliberately take very small volumes, and that's the whole idea. If it's too large a volume, then automation is obviously a different type of automation has to be done. But lab on a chip also tries to make something smaller and smaller. In making things smaller and smaller, one of the things it does is that the fluid mechanics sort of becomes more and more independent of gravity. uh, that's one of the advantages of this, that if you are able to develop a lab on a chip platform that, let's say, work in lower gravity, then that will work most likely almost as well on Mars or the moon, because by itself, a lab on a chip platform should have very little impact of gravity should be there on the movement of the fluids. But having said that, there is a little bit of I mean, I have to put a star mark saying that sometimes you can also have backflows because of the lack of orientation, and fluid can move into different compartments if you have not designed it well. I will assume that if you are doing all that well, then the impact of gravity is very low. So that is actually one of the good things about this.
Oh, fascinating. Also, maybe one last question before we start to pivot towards the space breaks. But in the meantime, let me just welcome back the audience. Today we are on our eighth space for Zetagravit. We have our guest, Dr. Alok Kumar, an associate professor at IISc, and we are discussing his pioneering work on the space breaks, the Manas payload, and the lab on a chip technology that is at the forefront of space research and also astrobiology and a lot more. So do tune in, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments or stick around till the end of the space so that you can come up and ask him yourself. So, sir, what do you think of the potential of lab on a chip, or maybe even microgravity experiments in general, once access to space becomes quite cheap, because I think one of the things I read was that launch costs are heavy, but something like Starship that is being developed is going to enable you to put much bigger automated labs up there, and much bigger systems in general that can do quite a bit of research, maybe much more complex research. So do you feel that the automation is still the challenge, or would you feel that now we might be able to send humans up there, so it becomes the synergy between human, robot, and humans to kind of do something similar to what ISS is? So, what do you see the potential of these kind of microgravity experiments? Because the Starship is kind of, every new test flight is, capturing our imagination and the potential. So, how do you see it?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns in the future because things are changing quite rapidly. As you correctly said, Starship is now capable of taking much bigger payloads at a lower cost, and you will probably, with lab on a chip, the payloads themselves will start to shrink. So most likely, what we can see in the future would be very complicated experiments happening in the low Earth orbit. I think that the first commercial there's a lot of interesting commercial aspect to this, and if we can, there are certain things, if we can grow in space which would be useful to the humans, we'd start to see factories being put up in space with some of these large, extremely large array of lab on a chip platforms put together. And the one advantage of having this kind of experiment in an ISS type of a setup would be that if something goes wrong, a human can intervene and correct it. And we do see that the biological payloads on the International Space Station are much simpler compared to the payloads that are designed for full automation. So you can have technically the next International Space Station could technically be a full factory up there where people just go to astronauts just go to tweak the experiments and keep them there. So I think this kind of factories of future or factories in space are probably going to become a reality in sometime.
That's amazing insights. So now, like my question is, in the BTech period, many people are not that much enthusiastic about the core branches, but these all the things are really interesting. So, what are advices for them who want to pursue their career in, let's say, creating such lab on chips platform or any other thing? Also, what kind of research opportunities are there in terms of lab on chip type of platforms?
Uh, yeah, so the thing is, see, one thing I truly believe, by the way, lab on anything, things like lab on a chip, they are extremely interdisciplinary. Okay, there is potential for an electronics engineer to work on it. There is potential for a mechanical engineer to work on it. There is potential for a biotechnological engineer to work on it. There's opportunities for a biologist to work on it. There's opportunities for a physics person to work on it. These platforms are extremely interdisciplinary. Usually, they need a large team with people with all sorts of varied backgrounds. So, one of the things that I truly believe is if your fundamentals are important, and in space, especially, you will have a lot of different opportunities come up for many people. I hope the space sector keeps on growing for us. The space startups are doing well, and they hopefully they will keep on doing this well. If they are, then it will create a need for a lot of different types of engineers. So don't, if you know, if you are a chemical engineer, don't think that the topics that you are dealing with have very little application in this, because every sort of person with different background, they will find a place. I mean, space is really diverse. It's so diverse that there is a place for everybody there. So uh, so that's why if you look at where lab on a chip research is going on in India or internationally, I am a mechanical engineer, but there are colleagues of mine who are in electronics who are also working on lab on a chip. I have colleagues who are in nanotechnology, they are also working on it. There are other people who are in chemical engineering, I know they're also working on it. So there's a lot of different type of people. So you can stay what you are and be very good at your fundamentals, and that will help you find your footing here.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely find that space is very multidisciplinary, it's very collaborative. I do believe that it's one of the most collaborative fields, and it's kind of this thing where we feel, Earth is coming together, to explore the cosmos. Like, there is a lot of research and collaboration across countries, across labs, and across disciplines. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential part, and we will now kind of move on to the space bricks part of our conversation, because that was, I think, the key discussion today. So that is, something that I think, as a mechanical engineer, new materials, new manufacturing techniques, I am quite fascinated, sir. So it is something that I was quite happy to see that someone is actually thinking of these kind of ideas, and so I will let you kind of introduce it, and then we'll get a little bit more into my questions about it. So, yeah, take it away, sir.
Sure. So, by the way, I mean, I've called it space bricks. It's sort of ironic because the bricks were one of the first things humans made for their living spaces. You will, if you ever go to one of the Mohenjo-daro Harappa sites, we made bricks from the local soil, and bricks were the first ceramics that humans utilized. Obviously, the Harappa people were great at it because they also made beads and everything. But when I started looking into this entire space habitation topic, I asked myself just a very fundamental question: is if you want on Earth, we need a house, so we'll need another house there. If we need another house, the fundamental unit of a house is a brick. How do you make a brick on Moon, and how do you make a brick on Mars? And is it really different than the way you make it uh, on Earth, for example? And I actually got to learn a lot more about Earth in my process, which I did not know. So it turns out, for example, on Moon, the sand that is there. So there's the top surface of Moon, which is sprinkled with these fine sand, gravelly material that is called the regolith. That's the technical term for it. And this regolith looks like a white sand actually, and it's actually very close in composition to certain type of rocks that we find on Earth called anorthosite rocks. Anorthosite rocks occur at different places on Earth. There's a huge anorthosite deposit in Tamil Nadu, also, which, by the way, ISRO has mined for this specific purpose. So, but most of the Moon dust is silicon dioxide, like almost close to 50%. After that, there is aluminum oxide, calcium oxide, and there are a few oxides and some others. So you have basically, this is just sand. There is no clay. By the way, clay is what makes Earth so special. Our trees, our plants, our life there is born by the clay that is there on the soil. So clay is that portion of the soil that retains water. So when you mix water with clay, the clay becomes a muddy thing. But if you were to mix water with sand, the sand just sediments out, and you can just take the water off and dry the sand as if there was no water there. Right? That's the difference between sand and this. So Moon is basically this a white sand that is there. So we decided that okay, if we wanted to make bricks, how do we do that? On Earth, interestingly, there is a process which is almost as old as evolution itself. It's a process called biocementation, where there are organisms that secrete calcium carbonate during, or not secrete, they lead to the precipitation of calcium carbonate crystals in its vicinity under the right circumstances due to its metabolism. And some of these organisms, they also cause binding due to, because there are certain bacteria that will secrete biopolymers and lead to consolidation. So you can take some soil from earth, put this bacteria, and this hardens over time. So I thought, okay, maybe can we repeat that kind of experiment with moon sand? And our first for almost 2 years we kept failing, and that's because the moon sand is a very inhospitable environment. The bacteria would die very quickly because there wasn't much for them to survive. The soil itself was extremely harsh environment for the bacteria, and if you've seen bacteria before, the it's basically a very small cell, but it doesn't have a lot of protection for itself against sharp objects and things like that. So if you put the moon sand under a scanning electron microscope, you see a lot of sharp edges. It's also charged most of the time. So then we decided that okay, we have to do something. So we started figuring out other recipes. So one of the things we realized that is we put a very small amount of guar gum, which is a biopolymer that you find on earth. It's made from a fruit that is grown in western India, and it's very very cheap. So if you take a small amount of biopolymer and you mix it with the lunar sand, suddenly the sand, lunar sand, becomes much more hospitable to the bacteria. So we were able to grow this biocementation bacteria. So what we would do is we would take this lunar sand. By the way, all the lunar sand and Martian sand that we use are simulants, which means that they are simulated on Earth to resemble the lunar sand or the Martian sand. So all my references to lunar sand or Martian sand are simulants. Uh, I'm just not going to repeat it because it's too long to say that. But we mixed a little bit of guar gum and we put a little bit of this bacteria, and then we would put it in molds and wait it for to dry. And out comes nice after 3-4 days, as the bacteria has had the chance to grow, precipitate this calcium carbonate, exude these biopolymers. This entire all these lunar sand particles, they get stuck and they become hard, and over 4 or 5 days what you end up getting is a nice little brick from that. So that's what we call the space bricks. It's a more general term now. Anything that can be any hardened structure made from lunar sand, we call space bricks now. So yeah, that was quite exciting because if we do go to Mars and Moon, we will take maybe some initial material from Earth for habitats, but we will have to use what is there. And on the Moon, all you have is that sand, unfortunately. On Mars, you still have that's different places. You have some amount of clay and some amount of things, but also you still have to use the Martian sand. So, like the Harappan people, we decided to make these bricks in our lab, and that has been quite successful. We have been able to make extremely strong bricks this way. We have also made bricks in multiple different manners. I'm not going into all that right now, but we can make bricks in multiple ways and make extremely hard bricks, as hard as the bricks on Earth, with our processes now.
Wow, that's great. I think like just thinking of the possibilities, because I think what you said was very key. And I think from moving to from like mud huts to kind of stronger structures, I think like brick making was a key technology where we were baking and making them into ceramics. And to think that now we are moving beyond Earth and we are taking some part of Earth with us and we're making bricks. I think the term is in situ resource utilization, right? Where we use regolith like this or any material there and kind of things like that. How do you see this in synergy with something like, let's say, space mining, right? Maybe like we mine asteroids and we are trying to kind of do something. And have you considered, like I heard Moon and Mars, but can space bricks work on asteroids, perhaps?
They can. By the way, I mean, this mining thing is extremely interesting. I myself have not worked on it that much, but I've looked into it. There was a paper from a European group, and they were so that there are millions of type of bacteria, and bacteria can do all sorts of things. So they were using one particular type of bacteria, which I don't remember the name right off the top of my head, but they used this particular bacteria to extract iron from Martian soil. And there's this entire set of people now working on this biomining prospects. So if you can use bacteria to mine these materials, so when you go to, you rightly said the term is in situ resource utilization. So when you go to Moon or Mars, you have to utilize whatever is there. So you have to utilize the soil there. So you can probably utilize these bacteria for extracting some of these minerals from the soils there, but maybe also on asteroids. Obviously, these are all fascinating topics. There's very little that is done with asteroids till now, but it's a extremely interesting topic, and how you would be mining precious metals from them.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that always fascinates me is kind of composite material. So what I was thinking is, I think you rightly mentioned there are different bacteria that can be used for different processes. So one of the key things that I would still like to know is, and I think you already mentioned this about lunar sand not being that effective for this without some sort of biopolymer from Earth and things like that. But radiation, right? Like one of the key things that we find makes life outside the Earth kind of non-existent is the fact that we are protected by these radiation belts, the Van Allen belts, and beyond that, when we go to the Moon or the Mars, they're just not well protected. So I think you mentioned there was some kind of inactive bacteria that you were activating and things like that. But um, how susceptible are they to radiation? Is that something you're also looking into? And does radiation play a role in the growth of the bacteria and things like that?
Okay, so one thing is that although while you do not have protection from atmosphere on Moon, you could get protection from, let's say, layers of space bricks that you can make out, and you could put like a 10-inch or more thick layer of space bricks between you and the outside environment, and that would be quite helpful. So people are saying that we have to, our first habitats will be maybe in the lava tubes, etc., where there will be this really thick layer of the regolith and the moon sand, etc., protecting you from the radiation. So that said, obviously, life radiation most of the time is harmful for life, except for there are certain type of bacteria and other organisms which are called extremophiles. There are a special category of extremophiles which tends to grow better when you have radiation, so they can use radiation as an energy source, but that's just a few species, not all of them. So most organisms will die from high energy radiation. So you don't want high energy radiation for most life forms. Although we know that there are certain type of bacteria that do grow in uranium mines, and they sort of thrive on the radiation, but not all life forms can do that. So it's going to be a challenge for us, and we have to figure out protective things for ourselves. And more or less all the good bacteria that we know, they can't take that much.
Yeah, yeah, I do understand what you mean. And I think, life evolves in kind of the environment. So definitely I can imagine some kind of wild bacteria in, trying to process uranium. But, lot of life is, life is also quite sensitive to its environmental changes, which, we kind of feel that when we are talking about things like climate change. But uh, let's talk about this extraterrestrial climates. uh, how does your space bricks, I think you were kind of talking about it, but it can be used for radiation shielding or thermal insulation. Like I think you mentioned the strength is comparable to earth's bricks, but I don't think we have earth's weight kind of on those celestial bodies. So I think the more thing is like thermal insulation or radiation shielding, and how does it fare in terms of those kind of functions? And is that something you're also thinking of in space break?
No, yeah, definitely. We will look into it. We are doing a little bit more. We haven't done a lot of things on that yet. But you are right. They will be used for thermal insulation. They will be used for these protecting yourself from the outer environment. Now, you would also mention that you like composites. So we probably have to, when we actually think of a final solution, it will probably have a complex or maybe a layered solution, where maybe you will have to have some amount of composites as thermal barriers, and then some amount of the space bricks together, and they can probably give you protection. Now most of this regolith is a really poor conductor of heat. As I told you, like for moon, most of it is silicon dioxide, so it's a very poor conductor. So they are an excellent thermal insulator, which means that they are an excellent thermal insulator. Similarly for Mars also, at most of the places, in some ways it's just a sand, it's just a red sand, although it contains a lot of iron, but that iron is in some compound form. So most of these regoliths are poor conductors of electricity, of heat and electricity, of course. Also they are on moon, obviously you also said one-sixth of the gravity, so you don't need that strong a brick, but well, we have been able to make that strong, so it's good, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's always good to have a factor of safety as engineers. So it's good to understand the limitations of the strength and things like that. But I will kind of wind down the space, as we're almost at the end of an hour, and I see our guests are still around. So I'm really thankful for everyone for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. And for those on YouTube, don't worry, we are also collecting your questions from there, and we will be asking Sir them. So, unfortunately, Sir cannot see them, but we will be kind of asking your questions. Please be patient and stay till the end. And yeah, we have a few more questions as we kind of wind down. But, Sir, so one thing I will say is probably. How do you probably see this influencing maybe terrestrial construction technology? Like, what has I always find it fascinating that we try to do something in space and then we try to implement that, and in that learning, Earth gets a bonus. So has there been some insights from this entire project that you might find maybe commercially viable, maybe something that can help just terrestrial construction in general in terms of habitat formation? And let's kind of bring that aspect and talk about your idea of analog missions, right? I think you probably use some of these space bricks in analog missions and try to make some habitats, have people operate in them and things like that. So uh, how do you kind of see this synergy and kind of the testing process of these space bricks for habitats? How is that kind of connected?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. We try to make something for space, and Earth gets a bonus. That happens quite a bit. So people keep asking you, why are you interested in doing research on extraterrestrial habitation while you could be working on technologies to help improve life on Earth? And I have to keep telling them that most of the time, good research there ends up happening, ends up benefiting life here. So you're totally right. This kind of technique would be very helpful for creating, let's say, for the space mix with this bacteria, that could be helpful for sustainable brick making. And in fact, actually, there is a startup in the US which has started looking into that. So they are now, what they are doing is, for some of these heavy duty bricks which use a lot of cement, they are trying to decrease them. And cement, by the way, is one of the largest producers of carbon dioxide on Earth. It has probably something around 40% of Earth's CO2 comes from cement related industries. So they are decreasing the amount of cement by, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4%, and adding this bacteria in its place, and they have been successfully able to make some bricks which are very good strength, enough that that can be actually implemented on the field. So for cement, even 2-3% reduction is a huge reduction, and that can help reduce a huge amount of carbon footprint for us. So work is already going on. I have also had multiple discussions with people interested in using this for sustainable architecture on earth. uh, yeah, so hopefully more things will come out of that also sometime. But yeah, people are already working on it, and it's just fascinating to see the application of all these space related research, that it comes back and helps us.
Yeah, I think the outward look is kind of an inward look as to how things played out, in the past, and how we are where we are. And that somehow kind of helps us to kind of move forward in directions that we couldn't fathom, but somehow it still feels natural. Like space is quite fascinating for me, and will always continue to be one of my dream fields to work in. So it's definitely something that, if I can contribute to research, if I can understand it, I'm always trying to find. And Zetagravit has been a great place for me to meet with various people from different fields, from astrophysics to you in mechanical engineering and bio. I don't even know how to express your field. It's such a synergy between like biotech, mechanical engineering, materials. It's so fascinating. And yeah, I think Parth has some more questions on the analog mission. So yeah, Parth, take it away.
Yeah. So, sir, I guess many people are confused about what analog missions exactly are. So, before like asking my questions, can you just explain what analog missions are?
Sure. So, see, our entire quest of having, let's say, a humans colony on Mars or Moon, obviously that's quite challenging, and we're not going to get there right away. We have to do a lot of different experiments in the middle to see what are the limitations of technology, or what are the issues caused uh, by living in remote conditions and away from civilization. So analog habitats is an idea. It's a very simple idea that you create an analog site on Earth in some place, and I'll tell you in a minute what kind of places. But you create an analog site on Earth which can mimic some aspect of life living or a habitat on Moon or Mars. So now you cannot obviously mimic an entire Moon condition or Mars condition, but only certain limited aspects, and that is more than enough. So analog habitats basically create that kind of an environment where you have a person living, let's say, usually in a very confined place, and that person has to live within that space for a very very long time. So you can, maybe for example, the biggest application of analog habitats is to understand the amount of stress on human beings. How do humans cope with living in isolation? So, can you live at a place? If you have to go to Mars, you would be living in isolation for maybe years with maybe just 1 or 2 people in contact. So, if I were to put you into a small house for 6 or 7 months, it's sort of like a big boss type of situation. Uh, will you be able to fare well? And I could add more and more and more constraints. So, for example, I could place this in Ladakh, where the temperature variations are large. Now, obviously, not as large as Moon, but still, they'll give you large temperature fluctuations in the day. So, can you build a habitat which can withstand that large temperature fluctuations? Can you build a habitat where there's no water around, very dry place, where during the day there's a lot of sun and lot of heat, and during the night it's quite cold, where human habitation is very very far away and you cannot get help immediately. So an analog habitat is basically meant to, its primary thing is to check, understand the effect of isolation and other parameters on humans, but also to understand how we can build an architecture for the Moon. Now, when you build an architecture for the moon, you cannot correct it. No, in your house, if your plumber makes a mistake, you can bring another person in and have that person correct it. But you'll not get a second chance on moon. So whatever habitat goes there has to be absolutely correct. So this is analog habitats are also an opportunity for us to test out all sorts of technology for before they are implemented elsewhere.
Yeah. So, sir, is it like that for satellites we do thermovac test, vibration test? So, can we say it as an analog habitat, or it's similar to the one for our missions?
Yeah, in some sense, it is a test of for human beings for for that kind of extended duration life. Yeah.
And like, what kind of things which we validate using this analog habitat?
See, there is no one thing. There's analog habitat serves many purposes. Uh, so it's usually a testing ground where you collect a lot of data, and then you see whether, for example, if you were to make food which were to be taken by somebody on moon, and but so on moon you will have to have all packaged food, and that packaged food will have you, that's the only thing the astronauts will have for like a year. So you can put somebody in an analog habitat and make them eat the food that you have packaged, and then we can see whether the human body is capable of taking that or not. Or you can say that water is rationed, so I will only provide you this much amount of water for the next 50 days. Is it possible? Can human beings survive that? So you can put like 10 human beings in 10 analogs sites and just see their response, and that helps understand all the problems that human beings are going to face. Analog habitats are mostly for human beings. So I mean, obviously it has other applications also, but its primary contribution is to understand the effect of isolation, effect of technology on the human being, and whether you can improve that technology or not. So it's not a pass fail kind of a test. You put people in there and then you keep improving your technology for that.
That's really amazing. So before continuing to the next set of questions, I would really like to thank. I'm like really thankful for you because like we are already like running 10 to 15 minutes over the time period which you promised. But like we also have got many questions from the audience. So I guess like let's move to the questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the questions I think was, they said, uh, as a major, like they wanted to talk about, I think, farming on Mars as a concept, and uh, how the space tricks can be beneficial and solve the low gravity or create an artificial atmosphere. So maybe something like a controlled environment. So uh, something along those lines.
Okay, so by the way, for space bricks have no relationship to farming, but space farming is a very interesting topic. People are looking into hydroponics and all sorts of other things for space farming. So if they are interested, they can look that up. By the way, the bricks, space bricks, just like the bricks on our planet, they are porous. So you cannot create a fully sealed environment with just space bricks. So you would probably have to have a composite structure or a combined structure. For example, you can have an inner inflatable, and that inflatable is protected by space bricks in order to create a livable atmosphere. But they cannot help with gravity at all, and they cannot help with uh, other things. The only thing they can help you with is provide structural protection against, let's say, small meteorite impacts, micrometeorite impacts, or thermal protection. That's the only thing that can they can sort of give you.
I see. I definitely find that, I think people were kind of looking at space bricks, in a much more futuristic sense. But yeah, I think even you might be fascinated at what use cases, people might drum up with once this is actually out there.
Yeah.
So I would definitely appreciate. I think we have some speakers on here as well trying to ask questions. So yeah, please do ask your questions. I think we have Abdullah here. So go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Abdullah. Hello.
I want to know that means what your space bricks you are making. What is your future on that means moon or Mars basis?
Uh, so we are looking at both lunar and Martian space bricks, uh, and both of them.
Like bases on Mars and moon.
Sorry, what?
Like making use of that space bricks on Mars and moon to make bases.
Sorry, I'm not sure I can understand that right now.
Okay, no problem, sir.
Can somebody else explain? I'm sorry, but the voice is a bit muffled, so I could exactly follow.
Okay, I am repeating, sir.
Yeah, Abdullah, can you do us a favor and actually comment out your question so that even if your voice isn't clear to sir, we can read out your question and yeah, he will kind of respond to you. So we will put you back as a listener. You can
Okay, sir.
kind of comment down and then we will answer it and so that we can answer it. So thank you for your question. And we had some other questions from our YouTube stream. One of it was something to talk about excavation techniques to kind of scoop Martian regolith, things like that. So they're asking something about, Mars simulant test beds in India. Are there any, uh, you know, things going on in that sense? Uh, yeah,
So Martian test beds are not there in India yet. We have lunar, obviously, but not Martian yet. Martian simulants, etc. They usually you'll have to get it from the US or other countries might have also created their own. I'm not fully sure. Uh, but if you were to excavate on the Mars, you could probably excavate it in the same way you excavate on Earth because Mars gravity is more or less exactly close, very close to that of Earth gravity, right? So you don't need necessarily need a different type of technology to excavate on Mars.
okay, okay. Because they had mentioned that Moldovine and feldspar content is sparsely distributed and something related to cavitation beds, but I'm not sensing a question there. It might have been more of a note, I would say. But the following question is, what is the present technology readiness levels of molecular biology and climatological studies of carbon filtration on Mars? Are you anyway in the know of this kind of research?
No, I have not done much work about it, but people are just expecting to have good carbon dioxide scrubbers right now. Right, I mean, I am not too much familiar with that. The only thing I know that is that people are looking into carbon dioxide scrubbers to get oxygen from the carbon dioxide atmosphere on Mars. But yeah, that's sort of about it that I know about that area.
Sure, sure. So I think that is about the questions I have from YouTube. Any other questions, Pat? You can take it away.
Yes, so, like one more person is asking, what is the present technology readiness level of molecular biology and climatological studies of carbon filtration on Mars?
Okay, that's really specific. I don't know, unfortunately, the answer to that. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries, sir. But if that's all the questions, I would also like to thank you for your time and wonderful insights. I really wish you the best when you get your Manas payload up there. I hope to see a lot more Manas, in this. I definitely want to kind of see the results, and I'm just fascinated with taking my biology out there. But I have one question as a personal thing. I think there is something called the Planetary Protection Act, which specifically has a lot of things about contaminating, let's say, space outside, so that tomorrow, maybe when we kind of try to detect life out there, we don't accidentally detect life that we sent out there. So, how do you kind of see this? Uh, is as a kind of, is there a conflict of interest, or how do you see these kind of experiments going out there and kind of changing the way we kind of even may see life out there tomorrow?
So, by the way, when humans went to moon, the Apollo missions, where did they leave all their waste? They left it there, right? So, despite all this, these things about planetary protection and sort of non-binding rules being there, when humans travel, you inadvertently there's basically no way that you're not going to leave some footprint behind. So it's we should do all the detection before we go and before we put all these labs over there. So it's very difficult not to contaminate the environment around, and we have already done that on, at least on moon. And the next human being who works on Mars will be totally contaminating the surface with whatever they have. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is one of the banes of, human existence. But I like to think of it as, we are the spaceships these microbes take in order to reach another celestial body.
yeah,
So it's a fascinating kind of thing as we kind of look at different scales. It feels like life, finds its way across the universe. And we define, carbon-based life a lot because that is what we've observed here. I do want to see how life might have evolved in different silicon based life. I've tried to think about it, but it's all fascinating what if scenarios and hypotheticals. But yeah, I do think that detecting them is going to require a change in the technology itself, in how we kind of define life and what we are exactly looking for. So I think that is going to be the real catch 22 of how we talk about extraterrestrial life in general.
right, yeah. It's a fascinating and complicated topic at the same time.
Yeah, most definitely, sir. Who are the aliens? Are we the aliens? Because on Mars, I feel like we are the aliens, right? Coming from Earth,
Yeah,
it's a very weird thing to say, but it's very true. So yeah, Parth, if you have anything else you can add, and if nothing else, I want to thank the audience for sticking about. Uh, and yeah, thank you, sir, for your wonderful answers, and thank you for your time.
sure. Thank you again very much for having me, and it was fantastic being here and talking to you guys. Hope your community grows and Zetagravity becomes quite famous and plays a big role in creating this ecosystem in India. Okay, so guys, I'm